Here at the Australian Music Vault, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome one of the country's most successful global music managers ever. And he was born in the city of Melbourne. Terry Blamey, AM. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Jane.
You're a man that is so comfortable behind the scenes. It's quite the rare treat to have you in front of a camera right now.
Yes, not comfortable in front of a camera, very comfortable behind the scenes, yeah.
Well, you made your name essentially managing Kylie Minogue from 1987 to 2012. We'll get to how you started managing a soap opera star and turned her into one of the biggest global exports Australia's ever seen. But I want to start right at the very beginning. In fact, with your grandfather, who was one of the highest-ranking soldiers in Australian military history, Sir Thomas Blamey.
Yes, the highest ranking, I believe, in the Australian Army, certainly. It's ironic that we're here in St Kilda Road. I have a picture taken by the Herald Sun in 1951 of 200,000 people lining St Kilda Road for his funeral cortege.
Oh.
So back then he was pretty highly thought of.
The Blamey name is quite synonymous with obviously the military and also in the town of Mornington as well, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. My grandfather bought land down there in 1930s, which we still have today, and you visited, Jane. Mm-hmm. And he never built a house. He never owned a house in his life or a car because he was a general in both world wars and he was the chief of police of Victoria between the wars. Always had a car and a driver.
And is it true that he earned a distrust for the media at one point?
Yes, when he was chief of police, he didn't like the media coming in and out of Russell Street Police Headquarters and listening to what was going on and maybe betraying police secrets, as he thought. So he banned them from Russell Street. And that became a contest of will of wits between them and himself and the media.
Do you like the media?
I have learnt to deal with media.
Yeah.
And yes, I had a lot of friends who are journalists like yourself, but you do have to know how to work with media. And if you're going to be an entertainment manager, I actually went to school in Chicago for a week in the early 1980s. I don't think even you knew that, to study media skills, which I found incredibly valuable. And I taught to my artists along the way, little hints that I picked up.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to hear what top tips you learn. But let's. This is quite ironic because you've worked in music all of your life, and yet you managed to skip out on piano and other music lessons when you were a child. You didn't like music lessons, did you?
Well, I thought I was very clever because I could find a way out of lessons and therefore have a free period. And we'd just wander around Botanic Gardens in our free periods and have a good time. So I found out that if you were tone deaf, you didn't have to attend music classes. So I put my hand up and said, that's me. And I got out of music classes, which is an incredibly stupid thing to do, considering how my career developed.
Yeah. Well, pretending you're tone deaf and yet later on you'd be able to pick hits, certainly
Yeah.
by Kylie anyway. In 1964, a band come to Australia who completely changed your life. They were the Beatles.
Yes. I was late to catch on to them and their success, but it opened my eyes, to the rock music industry of the world, which didn't really know much about. It wasn't really until a year or two later that I ran into some school friends who had formed a band. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I didn't necessarily want to be a rock star, but I wanted to be involved in that whole industry.
What was it that appealed to you?
I don't know. I was never a fan of the school sports and organised sports, and I think the heroes in those days were the sporting stars. But to me, the heroes were the rock stars. And when I saw my friends acting like rock stars, I thought, my God, it's attainable. I can be involved in that. That was the appeal.
So what did you end up doing? How did you join the band?
Well, I wanted to join the band, but they had a fantastic drummer at the time, and I couldn't play a musical instrument, so I learnt the drums, and formed my own band. And when my friend's band broke up, I stole a couple of musicians from their band and kept going. And it was maybe 10 years later. Well, during the time I was managing the band as well as playing drums because someone had to do it, so I did it. And then I realised for my band to ever make any money, it needed a decent drummer. So I replaced me and went on as a manager and have continued that way ever since.
What was it about managing your own band at that point that resonated with you?
Well, we were practising a lot and there's no point in rehearsing if you're not going to actually perform. So we needed gigs, we needed to perform in front of people. And everyone in the band said, well, how do we do that? How do we get gigs? And I said, well, it can't be that hard, I'll figure it out. So that was the appeal for me.
Can you remember some of the gigs you booked?
Well, in those days, the pubs weren't open past 6 p.m, I don't think. So it wasn't pubs in those days. It was yacht clubs, tennis clubs, sporting clubs, town halls, church socials, a lot of yacht clubs because, as I say, we spent a lot of time in the Mornington Peninsula. So I think we played in all the yacht clubs up and down the peninsula. That was a staple. And also I took up skiing when I was about 20 years old and started booking most of the bands on Mount Buller at the time. So played up there quite a bit as well.
I also believe the manager of the Bar and Club Hotel made you an offer you couldn't refuse one summer. What was that?
Well, I was running my own agency at the time, booking bands, and he rang up and he asked for a three-piece band that could perform for the entire summer for reasonably good money and full accommodation and all meals to spend the summer at the beach. So I rang up two friends and said, we're forming a band and I'm closing the office for the summer. So that's what we did. We played there for the entire summer, had an unbelievable time. I think it was summer of 72, 70, 71, 72 maybe.
Okay, so you'd formed your own agency by this point.
Yes. I formed it in about 1969 and I was basically working out of my own bedroom in Armidale in Melbourne, and I shared the house with three other people, so there was no other room for an office. So I had the front room and it was my bedroom and it was my office, and I didn't have any staff, so I had to get an answering machine, which in those days was like leasing a car. I mean, that was so rare and so expensive.
What did you call your agency?
The Victorian Entertainment Agency. And
did you have a big stable of artists?
I had a small stable of artists, but I also was, because I was at Melbourne University up until the end of 1971, a lot of universities would ring me to ask for bands for the student unions and the sporting clubs and things, because they didn't know anyone in the entertainment business, but they knew me because from university days. So I would get other bands for them and I would book other well-known bands around Melbourne. I knew who their manager was or who their agent was. So I did a lot of bookings, but I didn't have a big stable myself. I had about 3 or 4 bands that I knew personally.
What was the Melbourne scene like at that point, or what was the Australian music scene like at that point?
It was definitely in its infancy, but there were some fantastic bands. I mean, we used to go and see the La-Di-Dahs and the Wild Cherries and Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs and the Group, which had Glenn Shrike and Axiom. Axiom had Brian Cadd, and a lot of those great groups where some of our best artists have come from, and we were around in those days, and it was a wonderful scene. Before I was 18, I had to walk wherever we had to go to just go and see the bands. I couldn't afford a taxi, but I remember walking from South Yarra to Kew to go to Kew Club to see the Wild Cherries. It was worth it.
Did it ever occur to you that you could make a living from music? Because you were still majoring in economics, commercial law and accountancy at university at that time.
Yes, I actually was going to go to do an MBA in America, and that's when it hit me. I go, what am I doing? I'm just getting more degrees when what I really love doing is booking bands. So I quit before I even started in America and came back and set up my agency, the VEA.
At some point too, you also get a job with the Age newspaper, becoming a statistician. What exactly did that involve?
That was quite bizarre. I'd finished Melbourne University and I had no money, and I had to start in New York. They start the year in September. So I had a few months to fill in and I needed some money, and I wasn't making enough to live off from the bands I was booking at that stage. That was 1971 again. And so I had to pay rent, and I had my budgeting office and everything. And so I just applied for a job, and I got a job at the Age as a statistician because I had a commerce degree. It involved using statistics to lie to advertisers to make them believe that the Age was the best place for them to advertise.
Was it the best place for them?
Well, not really at the time, because the Sun and the Herald were cheaper but had a wider readership.
Right.
Age was more prestigious, though. So, I was trying to... I could come up with figures to convince them, but, statistics is lying if you want it to be without doing so.
So you were learning the art of spin.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Later on, when you formed the Victorian Entertainment Agency, you also managed to hire out roadie services, equipment hire, tour management. In fact, you become...
I did everything.
You were a one-man shop.
Yeah, I was trying to earn a living. And as I say, I only had 3 or 4 bands of my own that I could book. I bought a PA system and I rewired it. I learned how to rewire the PA system and then rented it out with me as the sound technician. I had no idea what I was doing. Then I built a small light show. And I was just doing anything I could to make a living in the music business. The Australian industry was in its infancy then.
It's around about this time you also meet 2 very important people in your life. One, Michael Gudinski, and his partner, Ray Evans.
Yes.
For the uninitiated, tell me how important and pivotal those relationships were in that time.
Michael and Ray had the biggest agency in Australia at the time. I didn't. Ray was about my age, maybe a year or 2 older, but Michael was younger than me, and I was only 21. It's like I didn't realise how young the people who were controlling the Australian music industry were. It was teenagers and young people. That's how young the industry was. And so, but to meet Michael, I already had him on a pedestal. I thought he was the best agent in Australia. And he asked me to come and run his agency.
Wow.
Virtually sight unseen on the basis of my reputation. Maybe it was my spin. I don't know. And so that was incredibly important for me because then I got to work with all the best bands in Australia, and I was booking Skyhooks and Buster Brown and the Dingoes and Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, and AC/DC came to our agency at around that time.
Did you get to meet Bon Scott?
I didn't. Michael Browning came in as their manager, even though he wasn't yet, and asked us to represent the band. So I didn't read them. I became good friends with Brian Johnson since, but unfortunately never really got to meet the band, really. We dealt through managers.
And yet they were on your books. And, of course, that agency was also well known for booking the Sunbury festivals. Did you have much experience with Sunbury?
I booked a lot of the acts on the show, and Gudinski took a contract for us to be the stage managers. So he got everyone from the office who had any idea about stage production to be a stage manager. I didn't really know that much about it. But yes, I was the stage manager for one of the 3 days, Sunbury 74, I guess.
Who was headlining that one? Was it Deep Purple?
It was AC/DC and Deep Purple.
Yeah.
They're the ones who had to fight backstage. Not on the day I was stage manager, though.
They had a fight backstage?
Yeah, about who should be on first or last, really. Who should be on last.
How was that solved?
Well, I wasn't there.
Oh, okay.
But
all right.
I wasn't there that day, so I can't really comment.
That's okay. Also around about this time, mobile discos become a thing. Because we hadn't seen them, certainly in this country. And I guess it was a van that was decked out with turntables, 2 turntables?
Well, not really a van. What we did was a friend of mine and I, we took over my father's garage and built, out of wood, a complete desk and inserted the turntables and the mixing and so on into it and made a quite heavy mobile discotheque with, it was all dressed in red shagpile carpet, even the speaker boxes.
So, the height of 70s luxury.
Yeah. Anyway, it looked impressive enough, and we got a lot of work. And so we got so much work, we built a second one. But by then I figured out how to build a lightweight one because the other one was so heavy. The second one we used a lot more because it didn't weigh so much. But when we had 2 bookings on the one night, we'd hire a DJ in
And again, you would sometimes DJ if there was no DJs available.
Yes, so I was trying not to because I don't like being in front of the cameras, but DJs in those days was a matter of really spinning the hits and knowing how to read a crowd and to adjust the tempo to the mood of the night. It wasn't what it is today, which is different skill altogether. It's creating music today. Before we were just playing music.
You said that an important lesson you learnt around this decade was that in any negotiation, the listener wins. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're in a negotiation with somebody, you need to know what it is they want and need. And if you're the kind of negotiator that barrages somebody, you don't get to learn what they want and what they need, which may even be less than they're asking for. So the more you can listen in the negotiation, the better you can do. And it was something I told Gudinski years later, and he kept throwing it back at me over the years.
Later on, a guy called Daryl Summers, who was hosting a Saturday morning TV show in the late 70s called Hey Hey It's Saturday, comes to you and says, I want to ramp up this show.
It was cartoons
need music.
only at that time. It was only cartoons.
It was
there
only
was nothing
cartoons.
else. Yeah, and he wanted to put music in.
So how did you approach this?
Well, so he asked me to provide bands, and I was already booking bands, and so I approached that. I found the bands who had their single released that week and offered them an opportunity to promote their record. So I was getting the best bands in Australia, really, week after week, and then it became the Hey Hey It's Saturday that people remember, which is much more than the cartoon show. And then obviously it went to night time and it went on and on.
And of course, around this time, IBM come out with a computer, and you taught yourself how to put together a call sheet or a system by which agencies could program their bands.
So this was a couple of years before IBM invented the PC. So there were primitive versions of that available. And I thought the booking of bands involves quite a bit of paperwork and scheduling. And I thought, well, computers sound like they're pretty good at that, not that anyone really knew. So I did some research and found out that you could get a booking system, like hotel booking systems or airline booking systems, which all exist today. They look at availabilities and costs and they print out confirmations and everything. So I, together with an expert from Pricewaterhouse who did understand what he was doing, together we programmed a system for booking bands. After about 6 months of programming, I figured out how to do it myself. So I owned the program, and so then I offered it up to other agents and I sold it to them, and I went and installed it for them. And so just the things you do to make money.
It's amazing. You self-teach yourself so many skills along the way. You also become a games retailer in a sense, or a games creator, a board game. So you want to be a rock star.
Yeah, my friend Simon Young, who is head of business affairs at Mushroom Records, he and I, our families would get together and play board games occasionally, and he said, you know what, there isn't one about rock music, so let's make one.
What was the object of the game?
The object of the game is to have a number one record, really, but there was 3 levels. There was touring, singles, and the album track. There were 3 different tracks on the album, on the game board, and the idea is to have the number one album.
I've played the game, Terry.
I know.
It's not very good.
It's very good. It's just very complicated.
Much like the music industry.
Much like the music industry. It's very, very realistic.
Let's go to 1985. This is a really pivotal moment in your career. A friend rings you up and says, there's an Aussie rules footballer called Mark Jacko Jackson. He had a number 3 single with a very memorable track called I'm an Individual, brackets, you can't fool me.
Correct.
He's looking for a manager. You take him on. Why?
I thought that he had something.
What was it?
He wasn't a singer. He'd written a book. He wasn't an author. He'd done a little acting. He wasn't an actor. He had even admitted himself he wasn't the world's best footballer. But he certainly had something that captured the public's attention. And I thought, I can really market this. I can make this work. And we did. We did incredibly well. We made millions of dollars and he had a primetime television show in America by the time we finished.
Okay, so you get Jacko comes onto your books and you say, I can market this. What was the first action? How did you navigate marketing a footballer to the public?
Well, there was interest in him, which is why I was interested, because he was so memorable and he was certainly unique.
He had a shock of white, blonde, spiky hair, didn't he? And
Yeah.
an almost kind of rough and ready, rugged face, didn't he?
And a great sense of humour. He would make fun of himself mostly, which was very, very clever and did very well. We did Arsenio Hall and the night show.
David Letterman?
David Letterman, yes, in a lot of shows across America, and they loved him. And so we just explored all the opportunities that we could find that suited his talents.
Of course, because around about this time, Crocodile Dundee was a big
Yes.
hit in the States. So
Yes, and that
being
was-
Australian was flavour of the month, wasn't
Very
it?
much so, yeah. And he was unique, and he was a character, and he would put on a show for anybody and make a fool of himself, and the Americans loved that. And but we did very well in Australia as well, obviously, before we went. But it was when he was offered the opportunity to do the advertisements for Energizer batteries that it really took off, because they spent many millions on airtime throughout America and Australia, New Zealand and Canada as well.
Because he filmed adverts for the Australian market for Eveready batteries, the American market, I believe the Canadian market,
Yes.
and the Japanese market as well.
No, the Japanese market was Suntory beer.
Suntory beer, okay. That's pretty incredible product endorsement.
Yeah, it was great.
So he was probably one of our first global superstars, along with Paul Hogan, perhaps.
I guess so. We did a very long tour of the United States doing media in all the major cities, television, radio and print in every major city in America, which is what enabled us to get a Glenn A. Larson production and for him to star in that. He didn't last long because he couldn't act very well.
So, okay, so he gets his own TV show in America.
Yeah.
What happened?
I think it went to his head. I hope he's not listening. He got carried away with his own star power, and the Americans weren't up for that. So he didn't last very long in that.
What did you learn from managing Mark Jacko Jackson?
Well, as I said, we went to school in Chicago to learn media skills, which was very useful, but also negotiating was very important. We, because I had to negotiate all the different contracts for the advertising and so on.
And of course, you've got this background as in law, haven't you? Or no,
well,
commerce.
commercial law.
Commercial law.
I'm not bad at contracts, you know. I like doing contracts, which has been incredibly useful for me in my career managing artists, because most artists hate contracts, and I'm not scared of them. I like that. And obviously with accountancy and economics and contract law, I was, well, as it turned out, I was well suited to be a manager in that respect.
So well suited, in fact, that when Kylie Minogue recorded a track called Locomotion, which she'd just treated as a party song that she got up with the Neighbours cast for at a Christmas party, I believe that her father Ron was asking around, saying, "I think my daughter needs a manager who might be best suited," and your name came up 3 times.
I know, what a coincidence. It was Jacko's accountant. It was one of them. He was the acting agent that she was using, who knew me because I was head of the Agents Association, the Music Agents Association at the time, so that's how she knew me. And the other person worked at Mushroom Records, so it was a no-brainer. I mean, he offered me the job, and it worked.
Were you, at that point, were you interested in managing a soap star?
Oh, I was very, very interested in managing Kylie. I think anybody could tell she was enormously talented, even though she was on Neighbours at the time. She really hadn't had a chance to spread her wings, but I saw her star power, her X factor, if you like, immediately, and I thought this girl can go a long way. Nobody anticipated exactly how far, so that was wonderful for all of us. But I could see at the beginning that she had it in her.
So, do you remember what was your first call of action as her manager once you signed on? It was June 1987. She's 18 years old. You know, you've had some experience and you've managed Jacko. What were you going to do?
Well, I started managing her at the time. She had just recorded Locomotion only days before, so we had to get a video together and a record sleeve together and solidify the deal with Mushroom Records, which she's still signed to this day. But there was a lot of groundwork to be done because Locomotion went straight to #1. Which meant there were a lot of opportunities. So there's plenty to do.
Which is a
right
manager
from day
dream
one.
come true, having an artist with a #1 record in Australia. Immediately.
And
Off
then-
the bat.
And then a year or two later in England, the first 5 records were top 2. So we hit the ground running.
Wow.
And we started working the world market straight away. Our first album went gold in America and everywhere else. It was quick.
She has to leave Neighbours at some point.
Yes.
Was that difficult to navigate?
Yeah, Brian Walsh, who was in charge of Neighbours at the time and is still very important in Foxtel, he and I butted heads. I said, well, she's got to leave the show. And he says, no, she doesn't. We became good friends after that. But I had to fight her corner because they needed to keep her. Well, they wanted to keep her because she was so successful. It was great for them. But she couldn't do both because the Neighbours schedule, filming a different episode every day, that's a huge amount of work. And you can't actually then promote a #1 record around the world simultaneously. So she had to leave Neighbours. So we gave them an extra 6 months or something, I said, and then we had to go. And we pretty much moved to England pretty quickly after that to base ourselves there for the world market, especially the European market.
Well, her follow-up single, I Should Be So Lucky, is now in common folklore as it was the song that they forgot that Stock Aitken and Waterman, the British production team behind the song, apparently forgot that she was supposed to be recording. Can you tell me that story? Is that story true, that she was waiting 3 days to record the follow-up to Locomotion?
Oh, definitely
and
waiting.
that they forgot?
Well, you say the follow-up to Locomotion. That was our first recording in England. It was the first record released outside Australia, was I Should Be So Lucky. She went to England because Locomotion had been produced by an engineer from Stock Aitken Waterman Hit Factory. And Gary Ashley, who was in charge of Mushroom at the time, suggested we go direct to Stock Aitken Waterman and get them to write the next singles and an album, because we had a #1 record already, not in England yet. And the story we were given is that Pete Waterman had left town and forgot to tell his co-writers, Stock and Aitken, that he'd made an arrangement to write some songs for Kylie. And he didn't return for about 3 or 4 days, and they just kept saying, they're not ready yet in the studio. And we found out from Pete when he did come back, oh, damn, I forgot you were coming. She's got 1 week off from filming. That's all. We've got to get back to Australia and back on the set of Neighbours. And so they came up with the idea, well, she should be so lucky to have a hit record from us. And so they wrote it, and it was huge.
I remember Darren Hinch on the Hinch Show, a current affairs show, playing the song. I mean, it was so widely anticipated.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't see that now on a current affair, would you? That
no.
Here a local pop star's got a new single out, but there was something different about Kylie. People were genuinely excited about her.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
She had a magic with the camera, be it a video camera, a movie camera, a still camera at all. And she could look straight down the lens and people would fall in love with her. I mean, she really had that X factor. And you knew how to use it. And she was a good singer and a good dancer and a pleasant personality. And the combination was just perfect.
Next up, she gets offered a role in the Delinquents movie. Was that your first time dealing with feature film people?
Yes, yeah. Roadshow Coote and Carroll was the name of the movie company, which became just Roadshow after that. But Greg Coote was the main producer there. And he approached me and said he has this idea for Kylie to be in the movie. And she loved the idea because she saw herself as an actress still, very much, and still does today, obviously. And so we did this movie on the Gold Coast at the brand new Warner Studios at the time. And I loved the movie. She didn't, and and it didn't do as well as we'd hoped. But the premieres were very well attended all over the world because Kylie attended, and thousands of fans went along. So we thought the movie was off to a great start, but then it just sort of fizzled out. But it's still available today somewhere. It's worth watching. She'd hate me saying that.
At this time too, your management stable, increases, and the Minogue family ask you to manage Kylie's sister Danny. Was there a conflict of interest ever?
There never was. I was afraid that there might be. And so I initially said to their father, I said, I can't manage the two sisters because there could be a conflict. And Danny said, no, please. And Kylie said, no, please. And I said, well, if you both want me to. And so we did. And we got on extremely well. So it was easy in that regard. There was no conflict. And I managed Danny for the first 10 years of her career after Young Talent Time. Mm-hmm. And I had negotiated her way out of Young Talent Time, but there were some other television projects we got involved with. She went on to Home and Away.
Yeah, she played Emma Jackson in Home and Away.
She did, and she did really well. And then her first 10 singles all went top 10 in England and around the world. So they went well. At the time, though, towards the end of my time with her, I was encouraging her to go into TV presenting because she was so good at that. I got her a contract with the Disney company presenting some shows in Europe. And she loved doing that. So I sort of encouraged her to do more of that. And so obviously she went on to do that very successfully.
There was also a young girl from Melbourne called Gina G who represented England in the Eurovision Song Contest. And you were asked, would you be interested in managing this lady? Which you did. What was it about Gina G that appealed?
Gina had just recorded a song with Warner Brothers, with an independent company, but it came out through Warner Brothers. The head of Warner Brothers at the time, Rob Dickens, he's the guy responsible for Enya's career and Rod Stewart's and others. He's a great man. He asked me if I could manage another girl from Melbourne. And I said, I don't really need another girl from Melbourne. I don't really want to. He said, we'll just meet with her. So we did. We met and we had coffee. And I realised she desperately needed help because she was about to have a very successful single and represent England in Eurovision. And I believe this single was going to be successful because the record company were fully behind it and fully believed in it. And so I thought, well, I can't say no. And I didn't want to say no. And so we worked together for a few years.
That single,
and it was
of course,
successful.
That single was Ooh Ah, just a little bit.
Exactly.
Ooh Ah, a little bit more.
That's it.
It was successful. What happened in the end with Gina?
As sometimes happens, people think, thank you for launching my career. I can take it from here. And that's how she felt. And I said, that's okay. I was pretty busy. I was so busy with Kylie and Danny as well. So I think she probably felt third best. So it's understandable she wanted to handle her own career from then on.
And there was also another woman from Melbourne, Denny Hines, daughter of Marsha Hines.
Yes.
And again, you heard her voice and you decided she needed a vehicle.
Yeah. So what we did is she recorded 2 songs with the Rock Millons, both of which were hits, and they were fantastic. But the same thing happened with her. Thanks for the launch, but I think I can do it on my own.
What is it about you and
okay.
female artists?
Oh, well.
You've never managed any men, have you?
If you don't count Jacko.
Oh, if you don't count Jacko. Okay, so you have.
And, of course, as you know, I'm looking after Richard Clapton at the moment.
Correct.
But, yes, I don't know, got on well with the Australian female songwriters and singers.
You once said to me one of your proudest moments was the first international tour that Kylie did in Japan. It was a Stock Aitken and Waterman showcase of sorts.
Of sorts.
Was this the one where...
But it was at the Tokyo Dome, which was tens of thousands of people, and it was her first live show. So she was very nervous, but she pulled it off, and it went incredibly well. And then Pete Waterman wanted to take that show and tour it around England. But he put on to showcase all of his artists on that one, not just Kylie. It was Kylie, Sonita and Dead or Alive in Japan. But he wanted to showcase all of his artists all around England. But Kylie was the draw card. So I said, we're not going to do it because it was a fully sponsored show by Coca-Cola. So I said, we're not going to do it unless it's free shows for everybody.
Why was it important to make it free?
Because they were charging a lot of money to see Kylie, and it was fully sponsored by Coca-Cola. She wasn't getting offered the money, neither were the artists, because it was deemed as a promotional tour. So they said, if you've got the artists who are working for free, the audience have to get in for free. It's only fair. Costs were covered by the Coca-Cola company.
Kylie would go on to do a Coke ad, wouldn't she?
Yes, and a Pepsi ad. She did both, a year or two apart.
An amusing thing happened on that tour, on that particular Tokyo show with Sunita and Dead or Alive. Dead or Alive, who of course had that hit, You Spin Me Around Like a Record.
Fantastic
But
song.
they apparently left in a bit of a tiz.
Yes, they were pretty upset that they weren't headlining. And then when they had to go on before Sunita, then they were furious. They thought they should be headlining, and now they dropped down to the opening act. And so they sabotaged the sound equipment and then left the country. Wasn't very nice. But we had a very good audio technician who, the backing tracks were primarily on tape in those days, on DAT, and the DAT machines had been sabotaged. So our technician cleaned them and found them, got them working again, and the show went on.
Tell me about the invitation you get from Prince Albert of Monaco.
The World Music Awards. And you're talking about the invitation to dinner.
Yes.
Well, that's really a problem of the English language, isn't it? That he invited us, Prince Albert invited us for dinner. I think Claudia Schiffer was there, and obviously Kylie and a few others. And I'd just come in my jeans. I had my dinner suit for the event, but I just had jeans and T-shirt. And I said, I can't. I was speaking to a friend of a friend, and said, the manager of Right Said Fred, actually. And I said, I can't go to this dinner. I don't have any pants. Implying I've only got jeans. And he said, well, who wears pants? I go, what are you talking? It's dinner with the Prince. Well, don't wear any pants. I didn't realise, of course, when the English say pants, they mean underpants.
And you're talking jeans,
And I'm
so
talking
there was
jeans.
a complete miscommunication.
Big miscommunication. But I went out and bought a suit.
I mean, dining with the likes of Prince Albert and Claudia Schiffer. You're a kid from Melbourne.
I know, and it was Kylie that opened all these doors, of course. Everybody wanted to meet with her and dine with her. So I was lucky enough to meet many, many wonderful, famous people that I could never have dreamt of otherwise.
There are moments in Kylie's career that fans are going to want me to ask you about. I have to ask them, Terry. You were there bystanding, watching the wonderful romance between her and Michael Hutchins. As a bystander and someone who loves and protects and is fiercely loyal to Kylie, what can you tell us about that romance?
She was like a little doll and he was a bit like a wild rock star, and they loved that about each other, and it worked. They both had something to bring to the table. And at first I wasn't sure about this wild rock star, but then I met him and we got on really well, and he's such a lovely man. He was such a lovely guy. We remained friends for years after they broke up, and it was a great relationship.
As someone who spent the most time with Kylie, was it hard to help her pick up the pieces after that romance ended? I imagine it was might have been fairly heartbreaking for her.
Yeah, well, every time a relationship breaks up, it's a serious relationship breaks up, it's difficult. And she's had a few breakups, which is not pleasant for her. And I tried to give her time off and give her space. Because our schedule was gruelling. It was just country after country. We just sometimes do 3 or 4 countries in a day, and different television shows and radio interviews and performances. It was a gruelling schedule. So obviously in times when she was feeling down, I tried to ease up the schedule as much as I could and be there for her, obviously. Her family are always there for her.
And of course there was the cancer scare, which again made global headlines and certainly raised awareness for breast cancer. And again, someone who's not comfortable in front of the camera, I remember Gudinski making a statement on your behalf. How was it navigating that particularly tough period of Kylie's career?
That was particularly difficult. I remember that it was a day or two before we were due to open the concert, the Greatest Hits Tour, I think it was, in Sydney. And she'd come to see her family in Melbourne and gone to the doctor and was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she was very distraught. She rang me and said, please come round to her parents' house. So I went around there straight away, and she told me, and everyone was very upset. And I said, well, we have to cancel the tour, obviously. And everyone said, obviously. So I rang Michael and I said, we have to cancel the tour. And he goes, no. I go, well, yeah, we have to cancel the tour. And he goes, yeah, we postponed the tour. I said, well, who knows when? He goes, no, it doesn't matter when. If you postpone a tour, people will hang on to their tickets, and whenever it comes back, they'll come back and everything will be saved, and nobody will lose any money, and nobody will sue anybody, and the insurance companies won't get involved. And that's when I learnt that. That's a very good idea. And, you know, unless a key member of the entourage has died, you can always postpone. You can always come back. And he asked me he said, well, now you're going to have to make an announcement to the Australian media. I said, Michael, you know I don't do that. That's not what I do. You have to do it. He goes, really? And I go, yes, you have to do it. So he did. So I watched him walk out in the Dundas Lane and speak to the cameras. He did a fantastic job, as always. He loves speaking to cameras.
Do you miss your friend?
Very much.
What do you miss most about him?
His wildness. He was an incredibly loyal man. I mean, incredibly loyal. He had a rough exterior and he appeared to be a tough businessman, but he in reality had a heart of gold and an incredibly loyal friend. We were friends over 50 years and colleagues. And I could speak to him about any aspect of the business that I was concerned about, and we'd chat quite often, and I miss that.
There was the East Timor concert that you did in 1999, which was very, very special. Do you want to just give me some background behind it? I know Glenn Wheatley and was it the Angels, Doc Neeson, kind of coordinated it. But there was a very emotional time for you going over there, wasn't it?
It was, more so than we anticipated. Doc Neeson had this idea to put on a concert for the troops in East Timor. He learned that our troops were not going to be able to come home for Christmas. And they had to stay there because the war was raging and the East Timorese needed protecting. They really did. And there were countries, all United Nations countries were there. There were people from all over the world defending this little half of an island, East Timor. And he said, let's put on a concert. So he went to Glenn Wheatley to see if he could get Farnham to go, because if he had a big name, he thought others would come, which was right. And Wheatley said he'd produce the show. He'd put it together. So Wheatley rang me and asked if Kylie would do the show. And I said, asked him the details, as you do as a manager. So, you know, what flights are we on? Like what airline? When are the flights? It's a troop carrier, an Australian Army troop carrier with canvas seats and no windows. Okay. He said, well, you're sitting next to John Farnham and Doc Neeson and everybody else, so it can't be that bad. Okay, so where are we going to stay? What hotel? He goes, hotel? There's no hotels.
Are you kidding
I was
me?
billeted out to someone's house. There are no houses. I go, what do you mean? He goes, there are no buildings. There are no buildings left in East Timor.
Goodness.
And I go, you're kidding. And they said, no, the war's been raging for a few years now and they've destroyed all the crops and the water, most of the men and all the buildings. I said, well, where are we going to stay? They said, the Australian Army Engineers Corps will build accommodation for us and we'll only stay one night. We'll fly in early one day from Darwin and then we'll go to the front lines and entertain the troops. Then we'll do the concert at night and then we'll leave the next day. And so we did. But it was eye-opening to see a war-torn country like that suffering. That's why it was so emotional. The strange thing, though, we had an audience of maybe 5,000 troops only. It was the Australian Army and the other armies that were there, the French and the Netherlands and Americans and English, they were all there. Everybody was carrying a gun. Never done a concert before where everybody was armed. So you certainly hope you go down well.
Wow.
Every person in the audience was carrying a gun.
Goodness me.
Loaded.
Oh, my goodness.
I know, quite scary.
As the manager of Kylie, what is the most bizarre request or most outlandish request you received?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know if it's anything terribly outlandish. Some of the bizarre ones we did, there's one performing on top of a mountain in Austria in the snow during the ski season with the skiers going overhead on the chairlift, and we had to perform in the snow, which is difficult to get get the equipment, the guitar amps and so on, but we did it. They had the budget for it, and there was a concert for the end of communism in Poland.
Wow.
Where we performed alongside the Scorpions, Kylie Minogue and the Scorpions.
Wow.
Two very different bands.
Winds of Change Scorpions.
Yes. Zech Walenska, the significant man who helped rid communism from Poland, he was there. He came to the show. So there have been some very interesting shows. There's one where Prince Charles asked us to perform at St James Palace just for him and invited guests. And I had to explain, well, it's difficult to put on the Kylie show as a charity show with no money, because it's not really a charity, is it, to perform at the castle for you and your guests?
For royalty, yes.
Well, yes, but we don't normally pay. And I said, I don't want you to pay, but there will be expenses. There's dancers and there's backing musicians and there's technicians and there's equipment hire. I said, but I'll do what I can. And I got a very cheap budget together. And they go, really? I go, that's just paying the people to put on the show, which we did. And it went down very well.
Well, something that went down very well also, which I imagine must be right up there, is Kylie performing at the 2000 Olympic Games.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I mean, that was really... They came in the last minute too. The games were almost over and they hadn't finished booking the acts for the closing ceremony, which I found strange. And they asked if Kylie would perform and we said, yeah, of course we will. And they said 2 songs and they wanted Dancing Queen, not really a Kylie song, but one she had recorded. And I said, well, the second song has to be On a Night Like This. And they said, well, that's not a hit. I said, no, but it will be. It will be by the time the closing ceremony comes along. It was our next single. And so she did On a Night Like This at the Olympic Games. And it was already number 1 in Australia on the night she did it. So that worked out perfectly well. And then 2 weeks later, we had to come back and do the opening ceremony for the Paralympics.
Have you always had that ability to pick hits or know what's going to work?
No, I'm not the one who pick hits. I have a feel for it. We've always had A&R managers, experts in the field, people who can find great songs and great producers and great engineers and the best studios, and that's the job of A&R. I have an opinion on songs.
Are you generally right on your opinion, or have you been proven wrong?
I like to think so, but then I will argue with record companies and lose the argument. So maybe my pick would have been better.
You and Kylie parted ways at the end of 2012, correct?
Yes.
What led to that decision?
I don't know. We've been together for 26 years. Kylie was looking at America and she's looking at more acting, and she said, listen, same thing, I think I can go my own way now. She's a very smart person and she learned an awful lot about what was involved in managing her career. And she knew her audience and she knew what they wanted and how to give it to them. So I probably wasn't needed as much as I had been. And she had a lot of good people around her, running her tours and record company people and others, and it tends to happen. I guess in a manager is an expensive luxury.
What did you do afterwards?
I started travelling a lot more and spending a lot more time with my grandchildren. But I've done a lot of consulting, as you know. I consult to artists and managers and record companies and other people in the industry, and I love doing that. And I hooked up again with Richard Clapton, I was his agent 50 years ago, and we hooked up recently, and I've been helping him over the last 3 or 4 years. And we put an album out during COVID, which is his highest charting album ever. So that worked.
During the Kylie years, you received one of the most internationally recognised awards ever for a music manager. It's the Peter Grant Award, and you received that for your outstanding contribution to the global music industry.
Oh no, I was blown away. I was completely blown away by that. That is the highest honour in music management. It's a British organisation, the Music Managers Forum, and for them to have picked me for that was special. They give away only one of those awards a year. So I flew my whole family over from wherever they were in the world to attend the award presentation, and I was really chuffed.
Would it be fair to say you were the only Australian music manager to win that? I can't think of any that have.
No, me either.
Quite a feat.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that.
And of course, Peter Grant, the man who led Zeppelin, as they say.
Yeah, named after him because he was one of the most dynamic, most forceful, most powerful, most successful managers at the beginning of the rock and roll era, really.
You seem like a man that learnt so much in your early part of your career. You learnt how to do everything yourself, and if you didn't know, you studied it. What advice do you give to young students or younger people coming into the industry who want to become music managers?
I think if I can define the difference between an agent and a manager, because many people don't know, is that the agent is the one who gets the gigs, and that's it. It's a very important job because you have to get gigs all over the world sometimes under different circumstances for different promoters and different venues, for different ticket price, different support, so on. But the manager does everything in a career, not just getting the gigs. So normally a manager will work with an agent. He can get the gigs, I'll do everything else. And then you work with the lawyer over some of the contracts, and you work with an accountant, and you work with a travel agent, and you work with hair and makeup artists, and you work with all sorts of different record companies, publishing companies, book publishing companies, merchandising companies. So you have to have a little bit of knowledge about all of these things to be a good manager. You can't have a meeting with an accountant if you don't understand anything he's talking about. Unfortunately, I have a degree in accountancy and law, so that helps a bit. But the more you can learn about all the various areas required to make a star, the better manager you can be.
Did managing Kylie and her being such the global superstar that she is, did you have to sacrifice a lot of stuff in order to maintain that relationship and that career?
I had to sacrifice a lot of time with my own family, with my children, and that. If I had any regret at all in my entire life, that's the only one. I didn't get to see my children grow up as much as I would love to have. I'm trying to make up for it with grandchildren and spend more time with them.
Apart from your 3 wonderful children, and I know you're very, very proud of them, what are you most proud of in your career, musically speaking?
Well, obviously that award that you mentioned and the Order of Australia are the 2 most overwhelming moments I've had, but they're personal moments. Most of my satisfaction and reward comes from making other people successful, and that's what I love doing. So it's a bit weird for me to be called successful. It's not what I do.
You're so modest. How would you like to be remembered, Terry Blamey?
As a good manager.
I think you're one of the best this country's ever produced, and we're very lucky to speak to you tonight here at the Australian Music Vault. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. Very kind.